Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me where you're from and what time you're watching. Now get comfortable and relax. The last tree of the city of Metropole, was a monument to steel, glass, and concrete. It was a city that had forgotten green. The last tree stood in the very center of the city, in a forgotten courtyard between two towering skyscrapers. It was a massive oak, ancient and gnarled, its bark as rough as a lifetime of stories. Its leaves were a deep dark green, a color so rare in Metropole that children thought it was a magical shade from a fairy tale. No one knew how the tree had survived. It was an anomaly in a world that valued efficiency over life. The city planners had tried to cut it down, but their saws would inexplicably break. Bulldozers would refuse to start. The tree was stubborn, and over time, the city simply left it alone. People would walk by it every day without a second glance, too busy with their phones and their hurried lives to notice the living thing in their midst. A young man named Kai worked in the skyscraper next to the tree. He was an architect, and his job was to design more perfect, more efficient buildings. He was good at his job, but he felt a quiet emptiness inside. He had a beautiful apartment, a good career, but he felt disconnected from the world. He felt like a part of his soul was missing. Every day on his lunch break, Kai would go to the small courtyard and sit on a concrete bench facing the tree. He didn't know why. The tree was just there. It was a constant in a world of constant change. He would sit and eat his lunch, and for the first time in his day, his mind would be quiet. He wasn't thinking about blueprints or deadlines. He was just breathing the slightly cleaner air the tree seemed to create. One day, a massive construction project was announced. A new, taller, more efficient skyscraper was to be built, and its location was directly on top of the last tree. The city planners didn't even bother to try and move it this time. They simply planned to demolish it. The papers reported the news with a single small article. No one cared. It was just a tree, but for Kai it was more than a tree. It was the only thing that made him feel alive. He knew he had to do something. He went to the city planning office, his heart pounding. He talked about the tree's history, about its resilience, about the small, quiet beauty it brought to the city. The officials listened politely, but they were unconcerned. "Mr. Kai," one of them said, "a tree is not a building. It's not a business. It doesn't serve a purpose." Kai left the office, defeated. He knew he couldn't stop them with words. He had to show them the tree's purpose. That evening, he went to the tree with a massive roll of paper and a set of charcoal pencils. He began to draw the tree. He drew every gnarled branch, every rough patch of bark, every tiny, perfect leaf. He drew the shadows the tree cast at different times of the day, the way the light filtered through its leaves. He didn't just draw the tree. He drew the feeling of the tree. He drew the way its silent presence made him feel at peace. He worked through the night, a man possessed. He wasn't an artist, but his hands moved with a purpose he had never felt before. He drew until the sun came up, and when he was done, he had created a massive, detailed, and beautiful drawing of the tree. It was so real it looked like a photograph. He took the drawing back to his office and used a massive, old-fashioned projector to project the image onto the side of the skyscraper that faced the tree. The image was a beautiful, stunningly realistic black and white mural of the tree, so big it was impossible to ignore. People began to notice. They stopped on the street and looked up, their faces full of a quiet wonder. They saw the giant image of the tree, and then they looked at the real tree below it. They saw the way the wind rustled the real leaves and the way the sun made the bark glow. They saw the art, but they also saw the real thing, the living, breathing, beautiful thing they had been ignoring for so long. The image went viral on social media. People came to the courtyard just to see the mural and the tree. They sat on the benches and looked at the ancient oak with new eyes. They brought their children, and for the first time, the courtyard was filled with quiet, joyful chatter. People began to feel the same sense of peace and calm that Kai had felt. The city officials were stunned. The tree, which had been a nuisance, had become a cultural landmark. They couldn't tear it down. The public outcry would have been immense. The tree had found its purpose. It was not a building or a business. It was a symbol of life, of resilience, and of the quiet beauty that exists in a world of noise. The city decided to build the new skyscraper around the courtyard, leaving the tree and the mural untouched. It became a new park, a beautiful oasis in the middle of a concrete desert. Kai left his job as an architect. He became a full-time artist, a man who used his hands not to build buildings but to draw the beauty of the world. And from then on, every time he saw a person stop to look at the last tree of Metropole, he knew that the tree was not just surviving, it was thriving, a silent, beautiful monument to the power of one single stubborn piece of nature. The town that ran on stories, the town of Fableton, was unlike any other. It had no electricity, no power lines, no engines. It ran on a different kind of energy, stories. Every morning, the townspeople would gather in the central square, and the town storyteller, an old woman named Alara, would stand on a small stage. She would not just tell stories, she would spin them. Alara's stories were not just words, they were fuel. The emotions and feelings she wove into her tales would be absorbed by a series of glowing crystal orbs placed around the town. When she told a funny story, the orbs would glow with a warm yellow light, and the town's bakery ovens would heat up, baking the morning bread. When she told a thrilling adventure, the orbs would pulse with a powerful blue light, and the town's water pumps would whir to life, bringing fresh water to the town. A sad story would create a soft purple light that would put the children to sleep at night. For generations, the system had worked perfectly. The town was peaceful, happy, and self-sufficient, all thanks to the power of a good tale. But lately, something was wrong. The lights were flickering. The ovens were cold. The water pumps were sputtering. The town was running out of energy. The people looked to Alara, who was growing older and more tired. Her stories were becoming weaker. The joy was not as joyful, the sadness not as sad. The feelings were not strong enough to power the town. The townspeople began to worry. Their peaceful lives were threatened. They urged Alara to tell more exciting stories, more tragic stories, anything to get the town running again. But Alara's stories were becoming thin, like a worn-out blanket. A young man named Leo, Alara's grandson, was a quiet boy who didn't like to speak in public. He loved his grandmother's stories more than anyone, and it pained him to see her so exhausted. He knew her stories were not just words, they were memories. Each tale was a piece of her life, and she was giving all of herself to the town. She was running on empty. One day, Alara was telling a story about a great battle, but her voice was weak, and the crystal orbs were just a faint, flickering light. The bakery ovens went cold, and a wave of panic went through the town. Leo couldn't stand it. He walked to the stage and stood beside his grandmother. "Grandmother," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "you can't give all your stories. The town needs more. It needs new ones." The people looked at Leo confused. How could this quiet boy know anything about stories? Alara looked at her grandson, a deep understanding in her eyes. "Leo," she said, "I have no new stories. My life is full of old ones." "Then let me tell one," Leo said, his heart pounding in his chest. "I have no great battles or adventures. My story is just about a boy." The townspeople were skeptical. They had always relied on grand, heroic tales. What kind of energy could a simple story provide? Leo took a deep breath and began to speak. He didn't tell a story from his imagination. He told a story from his heart. He told them about the time he first learned to ride a bicycle, about the feeling of his father's hand on his back, the fear of falling, and the pure, exhilarating joy of finally riding on his own. He described the feeling of the wind on his face, the taste of dust in his mouth, the sound of his father's proud laugh. His story was simple, quiet, and personal. But as he spoke, something incredible happened. The crystal orbs began to glow with a gentle, warm, and powerful light. The feeling of his story, the pure, simple joy of a child's triumph, was strong and true. The bakery ovens began to roar to life, the bread baking perfectly. Encouraged, Leo told another story. He told them about the feeling of quiet, peaceful comfort when he would sit beside his grandmother as she mended clothes, about the silent, unconditional love that existed between them. The orbs glowed with a soft, peaceful blue light, and the water pumps began to work, drawing up clear, cool water from the ground. The townspeople were amazed. They had been looking for grand tales, but all along the power they needed was in the simple, everyday stories of their own lives. They had been so busy listening to the heroics of others that they had forgotten to appreciate the magic in their own hearts. From that day on, the town of Fableton changed. The storytelling stage was no longer just for Alara. It was for everyone. People began to share their own stories, big and small. A farmer told a story about the stubborn sunflower that refused to grow. A little girl told a story about finding a lost cat. Each story, no matter how simple, had its own power, its own energy. Alara retired from the stage, her heart full. She didn't need to give herself away anymore. She watched as her town thrived, not on a few grand tales, but on a million small personal ones. She had taught her grandson a great lesson, and in doing so, he had taught her and the whole town an even greater one, that the most powerful stories are the ones we live every day. The town that froze in time. The town of Everwinter was a beautiful place, a postcard of eternal snow and ice. The buildings were covered in a permanent layer of frost, and the streets were always blanketed in a perfect crystalline snow. The people of Everwinter never aged. They were frozen in time, beautiful and unchanging. A young man would always be 25, a little girl would always be 10, and an old woman would always be 70. They did not get sick, they did not get hurt, and they did not die. This was thanks to the heart of Everwinter, a magnificent, glowing crystal that sat on a pedestal in the town square. The crystal pulsed with a soft blue light, and its magic kept the town and its people in a state of unchanging stillness. The people of Everwinter lived in perfect, polite harmony. There was no conflict, no sadness, and no pain, but there was also no joy, no surprise, and no progress. Each day was a perfect repetition of the last. They would wake up, eat the same meal, perform the same tasks, and go to sleep, only to repeat it all again. They didn't remember their pasts, and they didn't look forward to their futures. They just existed in a beautiful frozen state of now. A young woman named Alara, however, was different. She had a strange and terrible gift. She could feel the passage of time. To her, the frozen town was not peaceful. It was a prison. She could feel the minutes ticking by, the hours turning into days, the days into weeks. She saw the same people in the same places, performing the same actions, and it filled her with a profound, terrifying loneliness. She felt the weight of all the moments that were not happening, all the lives that were not changing. She would often go to the town square and sit near the heart of Everwinter. She would place her hand on the cold stone pedestal and feel the powerful stillness of the crystal, a stillness so deep it was almost deafening. She didn't understand why the town would want to live this way, but she knew she couldn't. She wanted to feel the warmth of the sun, the gentle rain, the chaotic, beautiful mess of life. One morning, as Alara sat by the crystal, a little bird landed on her hand. The bird, a small sparrow, looked at her with bright, curious eyes. Its wings were a flurry of movement, and its tiny heart beat with a rapid, wild rhythm. The bird was not from Everwinter. It was a creature of a different world, a world of constant change. Alara felt the bird's warmth, its energy, its vibrant life. She realized then that the only way to break the town's spell was not to destroy the crystal, but to show the people what they were missing. She had to show them the beauty and change. She ran back to her house and found an old, worn-out blanket. She went back to the town square and placed the blanket on the cold, icy ground. She then carefully placed the sparrow on the blanket. The people of Everwinter, intrigued by the new thing in their midst, began to gather. They had never seen a live animal before. They looked at the sparrow, its feathers so full of color and its heart so full of life. Alara knelt beside the bird and spoke to the townspeople, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is what we have given up," she said, her voice full of a raw, un-Everwinter sadness. "This is the beauty of change. We are beautiful, but we are a painting, not a life. We are frozen, and we cannot feel the warmth of a new day or the sadness of a lost one. We cannot feel the joy of a new experience or the pain of a scar. We cannot grow." As she spoke, a single tear, the first tear to fall in 100 years, rolled down her cheek and landed on the heart of Everwinter. When the tear touched the crystal, a blinding flash of white light erupted from the crystal. A high-pitched thrum echoed through the town, a sound so loud it seemed to shatter the very air. The permanent frost on the buildings began to melt. The perfect snow on the ground began to turn into slush. The people of Everwinter felt a new and terrifying sensation: warmth. The warmth felt strange at first, like a foreign language. They felt the cold slush on their feet, the heat of their own bodies, the rapid beating of their hearts. The young man who had been 25 for a century suddenly felt his muscles ache with a new feeling of tiredness. The old woman, who had been 70 for 100 years, felt her joints creak. They were scared, but they were also alive. The spell was broken. Everwinter was no longer frozen. The snow melted, revealing the brown, soft earth underneath. The plants, which had been in a state of perpetual winter, began to grow. The people began to change. They felt sadness and they felt joy. They felt tired, but they felt alive. Alara watched as the town came to life. The people were no longer just beautiful statues. They were living, breathing, imperfect, and beautiful human beings. The heart of Everwinter was no longer a perfect, glowing crystal. It was a single, beautiful rock full of cracks with a single small plant growing from a crevice. It was a monument to the beauty of a life lived. And Alara, who had been an outcast, became the town's first hero. She had not given them eternal life. She had given them life itself. The boy who wove memories into cloth, Leo, lived in a quiet town where people used a unique form of currency: memories. When you needed to buy something, you didn't use money. You would offer a memory in exchange. If a farmer sold you a basket of apples, you might give him the memory of a perfect, sun-drenched day in a field. The farmer, in turn, would accept the memory, feeling the warmth of the sun and the joy of that moment. The town, called Everleaf, was filled with people who had minds rich with stories, emotions, and experiences. But there was a problem. Memories are not equal. A grand, joyous memory was worth more than a simple, quiet one. The rich people were those with the most powerful, dramatic memories, and the poor were those with only small, faded ones. People began to fake their memories, or to steal them from one another, and the town's unique system started to fall apart. Leo was a weaver, a quiet boy who worked in his small shop, crafting beautiful fabrics. He didn't have many grand memories. His memories were simple and small: the feeling of soft cotton on his skin, the rhythm of his loom, the scent of wood and wool. They weren't worth much in the town's economy. He was often hungry, but he refused to lie or steal. One day, an old woman came to his shop, her face etched with a deep sadness. She was a woman who had a fortune of grand memories, but they were all of loss and grief. "I have no more happy memories to trade," she said, her voice a tired whisper. "All I have are memories of goodbyes. Can you take one in exchange for this?" She held up a small empty basket. Leo looked at the basket, then at her face. He felt a deep empathy for her. He knew he couldn't just give her a basket. He had to give her something more. He looked at his loom, at the threads of different colors, and an idea came to him. "I will take your memory," he said, "but in return I will give you a piece of cloth." The woman looked confused, but she accepted. She closed her eyes and offered a memory, the painful, final goodbye to her husband as he left for a long journey, a journey from which he never returned. As she offered the memory, Leo felt the wave of sorrow wash over him. It was a heavy, cold feeling. He took a single thin black thread and wove it into his loom, letting the sadness guide his hands. Then he took a thread of a soft, comforting gray and wove that in too, to represent the peaceful feeling of her love. He took another thread, a bright, hopeful blue, and wove it in to represent the hope she must have had in the beginning. He wove and wove, taking all the threads of her complex emotion and turning them into a single, beautiful piece of fabric. The cloth was not just gray or black. It was a swirling tapestry of emotion, a beautiful, artistic representation of her entire memory, not just the sad part. When he was done, he cut the cloth and presented it to her. "This is not just a piece of cloth," he said. "This is your memory woven back into a whole beautiful thing." The woman took the cloth and felt its texture. She saw the black of her sadness, but she also saw the bright blue of her hope and the soft gray of her love. She felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time, she was able to hold her sad memory without it feeling like a burden. It was simply a beautiful part of her story. She smiled, a genuine smile she hadn't made in years. From that day on, Leo's shop became a new kind of business. People came to him not just to trade, but to find healing. A man who was consumed by the memory of a lost job came to Leo. Leo took the memory of his shame and fear, and he wove it into a cloth of courage and new beginnings. He would take a broken memory and turn it into a beautiful piece of art. His cloths were not just objects. They were stories, lessons, and feelings that had been transformed. Leo never became rich in the town's currency. He had no grand memories to trade. But his shop was always full, and his heart was full too. He was a quiet boy who had found a powerful way to change the world. He taught the town that memories were not just a way to pay for things. They were what made us human. He taught them that even the most painful memories could be transformed into something beautiful, if only you looked at them with a different perspective. And so, the town of Everleaf, once full of a chaotic and sad economy, became a place of beautiful art and quiet healing, all thanks to a simple boy who knew how to weave a story into a piece of cloth. The town of shared silences. The town of Hollowell was a quiet place, but not in the peaceful way of a forest or a library. It was a silence born of politeness, of a fear of being a bother. The people of Hollowell never interrupted each other. They would wait patiently for a speaker to finish, no matter how long it took. They would never finish a person's sentence, even if they knew what they were going to say. They believed that this was the highest form of respect, but it made their conversations long, slow, and full of awkward pauses. Awkward. A young woman named Clara, however, was different. She was a sculptor, and her creations were not made of stone or clay, but of silence. Clara had the unique gift of being able to mold the silence in a room. She could take the empty space between words and give it a shape, a feeling, and a purpose. When she was with a friend, she would take the silence between their sentences and make it feel comfortable, a soft, warm, and inviting space. When she was with someone who was grieving, she would shape the silence into a gentle, peaceful blanket of understanding. She didn't know how she did it. She just felt it in her hands. The people of Hollowell, however, found her gift unsettling. They saw silence as a lack of sound, not a thing to be shaped. They preferred their rigid, predictable pauses. They would watch her work, her hands moving through the air as if she were sculpting an invisible thing, and they would politely look away. One evening, a terrible argument broke out in the town hall. Two families who had been neighbors for generations had a disagreement over a forgotten debt. The argument was not loud. In Hollowell, it never was. It was a cold, tense silence, a silence filled with unspoken anger and resentment. It was a thick, heavy silence that seemed to press down on the entire town, suffocating all of its gentle peace. The mayor, a kind but ineffectual man, tried to intervene, but his words were polite and his voice was low, and they were swallowed by the terrible silence. The families simply looked at each other with silent fury, the air thick with unspoken threats and old grudges. Clara stood in the back of the room, her heart aching. This was not the quiet of respect. It was the silence of a broken heart. She knew she had to do something. She walked slowly to the center of the room, her hands trembling. She looked at the two families, at their faces hardened by years of unspoken frustration. She took a deep breath, and she began to work. She reached out with her hands, not touching anything, but molding the air. She took the silence of anger and she began to pull at it, to stretch it, to give it a new shape. She separated the angry parts, the resentful parts, and she replaced them with something else. She pulled from the air a silence of shared history, of old, happy memories. She shaped a silence of understanding, of two families who had once been friends. She worked with a feverish intensity, her hands moving as if she were pulling a beautiful, invisible fabric from the air. The people in the room watched in stunned silence. They couldn't see what she was doing, but they could feel it. The heavy, oppressive silence of the room began to lift. The angry silence was replaced with a different kind of quiet. It was a thoughtful quiet, a quiet full of memories and feelings. They felt the ghost of old laughter, of shared meals, of children playing. They felt the weight of what they were losing. The two families, who had been frozen in anger, felt the new silence. They looked at each other, and their faces, which had been so cold, softened. The anger didn't just disappear. It was still there, but it was now wrapped in a new silence, a silence of regret and sadness. It was no longer a weapon, but a wound. And for the first time, they felt a need to heal it. The mayor, his eyes full of wonder, watched as the two family patriarchs looked at each other. The old man from one family broke the silence first. "I remember the day your son was born," he said, his voice soft, a single, humble memory filling the newly shaped silence. The other man's face crumpled with a sad, gentle regret. "I remember your wife's funeral," I remember how you looked that day. I'm sorry. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of shared sorrow, of old memories, and of the quiet promise of forgiveness. From that day on, Clara became the town's most important person. She didn't sculpt with stone. She sculpted with the moments that came between words. She taught the people of Hollowell that silence was not an absence of sound, but a powerful, living thing that could be used for good. She taught them that a shared silence could be more meaningful than 1,000 words if only they learned how to shape it. And the town, once so full of a quiet, polite emptiness, became a place of deep, beautiful connection. The town that lost its gravity. The town of Airlight was known for one thing: its lack of gravity. For as long as anyone could remember, the town had been a place of gentle, floating movement. People didn't walk. They drifted. Objects didn't fall. They would simply hang in the air, waiting to be caught. The air was always filled with the quiet, graceful ballet of people and things in motion. It was a beautiful, peaceful existence. The people of Airlight, however, had a strange problem. They had lost their sense of purpose. With no gravity to hold them down, they had no need to build strong foundations, no need to work for a living, no need to even plant their feet on the ground. They simply existed in a state of easy, effortless being. They were happy, but they were also empty. They had no goals, no ambitions, no desires. They just drifted from one day to the next, a town of beautiful, aimless souls. A young man named Leo, however, felt a deep, profound yearning for a different kind of life. He was a builder, a man who loved the feeling of a hammer in his hand and the weight of a stone in his palm. He had a strange and terrible gift. He could feel the pull of gravity. To him, the town's weightlessness was not a blessing, it was a curse. He longed for the feeling of a world with consequences, with cause and effect, with the beautiful, satisfying feeling of an object falling into place. He would often go to the edge of town, where the magic of Airlight faded, and he would watch. The rocks tumbled down a hill, a beautiful, powerful motion he couldn't replicate in his own world. He felt a deep, homesick feeling for a place he had never been. One day, an old woman named Alara, the town's oldest resident, came to him. She was a woman who had spent her life drifting, and she had a look of deep, ancient emptiness in her eyes. "Leo," she said, her voice a soft, weightless whisper. "I feel it too. This feeling of nothingness. We have a life of grace, but we have no life of substance. We have no weight." She then showed him a secret she had been keeping for years. She took him to an old, abandoned part of town, to a place where the weightlessness was weaker. There, she showed him an old, discarded sundial. It was a massive, beautiful thing, but it was broken. Its metal arm, which was supposed to cast a shadow and tell the time, was twisted and useless. "This sundial was the heart of our town once," she said. "It kept us grounded. It told us the time. It showed us the passage of a day, a week, a year. When we lost our gravity, the sundial broke, and we lost our purpose." Leo looked at the broken sundial. He saw the beautiful, useless art of it, and a strange fire was lit in his heart. He knew what he had to do. He would not just fix the sundial, he would give the town its purpose back. He spent the next few weeks working on the sundial. It was a difficult and frustrating job. He had to learn how to work with gravity in a world without it. He would use heavy stones from the town's edge to hold his tools in place. He would use old, heavy chains to keep himself from floating away. It was a slow and painstaking process, but he was driven by a new, powerful feeling. A feeling of a goal, of a purpose, of a final, magnificent completion. He would hammer a nail into a piece of wood, and he would feel the satisfying thud of the hammer against the metal. He would lift a heavy stone, and he would feel the beautiful, powerful weight of it in his arms. He was not just fixing a sundial, he was fixing himself. He was building his own purpose. When he was done, the sundial was magnificent. The metal was polished, the numbers were clear, and the arm was straight and true. But it still wouldn't work. The town had no gravity, no sun to cast a shadow. Leo looked at his creation, and for the first time in his life, he felt the cold, hard weight of defeat. He had worked so hard, but it was all for nothing. He sat beside the sundial, his heart heavy, when an idea came to him. He was a builder. He had spent his life working with weight and gravity. He had to use what he had. He walked to the town square and spoke to the people of Airlight. "I can't make the sun cast a shadow," he said, his voice full of a new, powerful resolve. "But I can give us something else. I can give us a purpose. We will make our own time. We will make our own shadow." He then did something no one in Airlight had ever done.